such a thrill to meet you, your mother, and Phil Donahue, all in Atlanta. What did she think when we were coming down? Did she confide in you as to what to expect?
Well, she was extremely excited. She knew that Phil had wanted to interview her about 20 years before. But she was taking care of my dad, and so she knew that this was a second chance, and it was nice because it was going to be in a cozy setting.
Right.
And so the night before, we were trying to think of any questions he might ask, and we just kept rehearsing and rehearsing and practicing so that she could keep things fresh in her mind. And so if she ever got lost, I could just say a couple words that came right back to her. So
you were terrific. You were off stage.
Yeah.
In fact, we have a video of you that looks at the two of Lillian and Phil. And you're really center stage on that one.
She was very modest about it because she said, just because their case became very publicized, that she said, but there were so many other kids that were expelled. It could have been any of us. She said, just for whatever reason, it happened to focus on our family. But she didn't take it like they were anything special. She just said it just happened to be that way. But it could have been anybody's case that could have been so brought out like it was. And what I think is amazing is that most attorneys, when they were learning before they took their bar exam, were required to study her case. But it never got to her head, put it that way. She never thought she was all that. She just was very humble about it and was happy to represent our faith in that way.
Over time, did she feel like she was some celebrity?
I felt like my parents were celebrities. I felt like they were. She didn't act like that or talk like that. Sometimes you had to draw her out to get it because she wouldn't necessarily come. She doesn't lead with that. But if people had heard who she was or figured out who she was, she definitely, could say about her story. But she was, like I said, she was very humble about it. I had my own experiences in school where I was verbally tormented day after day for months. And then they caught me in the ladies' room, and they threw me on the floor, and they hit me, and I had to literally fight my way out of the bathroom. And when they asked those kids why they did that, they said because she's a Jehovah's Witness and she's different, and she won't wear mini skirts. It infuriated them. And years later, we're talking a whole lot of years later now that I've been out of school, I recently got a message from one of the girls that now her son is being bullied, and she sent her apologies after all these years. One of the main ones that did that. But it was, for Mom, for me, understanding my dad was in a concentration camp, when he talked about working underground, as a kid I thought it was literally underground. And so when I started to understand later, his stories were just so meaningful to me. Her stories were so meaningful because every year when we started a new grade, we had explained to the teacher all the holidays we didn't celebrate, why we didn't do the flag salute. We would stand in the hallway for the flag salute. So it started at, for the minute I started school, I had to take a stand. So her stand meant a lot to me, to know how strong they were, how they firmly stood up no matter what happened to them.
In your time period, they asked you to leave the room?
Yes, apparently we were considered a distraction or like a disruption for the class, so they didn't want us in the room. They felt like it was better if we were dismissed. So I would see my brother in the hallway, hey, and any other witnesses. We would just kind of look at each other and say hi in the hallway and wait till it was over and go back in. But they would rather us not be there and take away from the moment. Some people just don't understand us. They think we're a cult, or they think we're just irritating that we come to their door. And I have people tell me, oh, I always hide when you get there, things like that. And but once they get to know you, they realize you're just like a normal human being. You're not part of a cult. You just have a different way of doing things as far as holidays, that it's so pivotal to us to find out the truth behind things and not just do them because it's traditional, but find out what's the real story. Well, how did this start, this particular tradition or holiday? And if it does go against God's principles or God's will, we don't want to be a part of it then, even though it's going against the mainstream. So a lot of people have a problem with you being different. There was, in the initial, it was a hand up like this.
Yeah, a palm up.
A palm up. And then, of course, Hitler's palm down. A little too close for my comfort. But then later it was the hand on the heart. From what I've studied and read about it, was more that it was in violation of the loyalty to Jehovah, our allegiance to him, and that he didn't want anything man-made or otherwise intrusively ahead of him or instead of him. And the fact that my mom was going through this at the same time that my dad was in the concentration camp just more or less reinforced our being separate and different, and that we'd want to take a stand to not be a part of someone that, people held Hitler in high regard because he seemed like a good guy at first, providing all these jobs and everything they needed, and then of course turned into a whole different situation later.
Let's talk about your dad. He was a Jehovah's Witness.
Well, let me tell you this. He actually wasn't baptized yet, and this was his first door. You know how we go from door to door? It was his first door he'd ever been to, and he was arrested on the spot.
Oh my gosh.
So, and he was the youngest in the camp. He was like 20, 21. And they feared the oldest witness in the camp. That was a little old brother, all bent over. They feared him the most because they couldn't break him.
Now, your dad's name is?
Irvin Klose. His dad died when he was 3,
Okay.
but his mom raised them as witnesses.
Dad becomes, was he ever baptized?
Yes, just he was arrested before he could get baptized.
Oh my God. So, what was his life? What year was that?
It was the same time Mom was going through her, so in the early 40s. I finally sat down and asked him one day how many times he'd been arrested, how many prisons, how many concentration camps. It was like 11 or 12 times. We actually wrote down the name of all the jails, all the prisons he'd been in. His picture was in the post office. He was wanted. So he would smuggle literature underground. And he had so many incredible close call stories that, and so he spoke to 75 different classes in Atlanta. And they would ask him, did you ever escape? And he said, unlike Hogan's Heroes, the guards are really smart. No, you did not escape. And he said to humiliate them at the camps, they would make them roll in. You couldn't walk into a concentration camp, you actually rolled in. And one time, if I could tell you one story, one time the leader of the camp was the Iron Gustav, was his nickname. And I've talked to other people these days, and they've heard of him, because he was known to be so horrible. And he had really overworked them, their skin and bones, and they're making them do all this exercise and work just for their sport. And he said to them, tomorrow you will all sign a paper denouncing your faith and saying you won't be a witness any longer. I will make you all break tomorrow. Well, they prayed like they'd never prayed before. The next day, and I finally saw on the internet a picture of the opening of their camp, and it's a huge opening. And he rode a Harley Davidson to work every day. And for some reason that day, even though the camp gates were like 12 feet apart, he went straight into the pole, split his head open, was in the hospital for 3 months. When he came back and addressed them, he looked at all of them and goes, your Jehovah did this. And they all amened under their breath. So all that prayer paid off. He could never break them. After it was over, they mixed him up with they put him in the very camp with the German guards and soldiers. They mixed him up, thought he was posing as one of them, and put him in like a dungeon with them, with the very people who had put them in the camp. And finally they straightened it out and got him out of there. But he was just at very times arrested, let go, just like my mom was arrested and let go before when she was real young.
How did they meet?
Okay, this is the best story. It is amazing that they were both going through this at the same time, and it's amazing that they got to meet. But someone gave her a ticket to Europe, and she went to a party. And he had a beautiful singing voice, and he's singing at this party. And she goes up to him, and she's going on and on about how fabulous he sounds. And he smiled, and the more he smiled, the more she talked. And when she walked away, he said to his friend, what did she say? I didn't understand a word of English. And then years later, he came to our missionary school in New York called Gilead to become a missionary. And he took a crash course in English. And these 2 German sisters said to him, have we got a girl for you? Oh, wow. And they introduced him. And I got to meet those 2 sisters. And they saw each other, and of course it had been many years. And, love is a universal language. They were engaged 3 months later.
My.
Totally fell. And they were just so perfectly suited for each other.
What time period was this? When did they get married?
They got married in 54.
What's your emotions here?
It makes me so happy that they took the stand they did. And it turned out, to me, it helped buy religious freedom for all Americans. And then my dad, they wanted him to be part of the Hitler Youth. He flew a glider, so he was valuable to them. And of course, he refused to become a military German. And a lot of people say to me, but why didn't he fight for his country? And I said, who would he have been killing? You, Americans. So be glad he didn't, because he was very strong. He was very good at everything he did. And he, even though he still couldn't talk about some of the stuff that happened to this day, he really took an amazing stand considering what all, and there was times that it was just unreal that he didn't get killed. That, it was like the angels knew something had changed and put him in the right path, But I just think it's amazing that I can be proud of both of them and try to do my best to follow their good examples. Oh, got a story about that. My dad is walking down the street, and here comes the SS, and he's drunk off his rocker. But then some other guys started coming up. My dad was like, oh no, here it goes. They're going to arrest me. And he looked at him and he goes, don't you know who I am? And the guy immediately put his helmet on and saluted him and said, bye, and took off.
Very quick thinking.
So, but my dad had used disguises, fake names, everything. And just to be able to carry on and get the literature to the other brothers and sisters. He really put his neck out there to get it done. And sometimes people that didn't like the Nazis would help him, would put him in to their room, in his house, would take him in. They didn't like the witnesses necessarily, but they hated the Nazis. And because of that, they helped him out.
Dad was sort of an underground assisting Jehovah's Witnesses so that they could somehow persevere.
He was. Yeah, definitely. It was, and he had a lot of help, and there was other people that also risked their lives to do that, to make sure the literature got to where it needed to go, to keep everyone spiritually strong. And he did it in Holland, and in various places, not just in Germany. I have another story. One time they had these pamphlets, and they were told to meet between 9 o'clock and 10 after 9, not a minute before, not a minute after, and distribute these pamphlets. Just put them out on the streets wherever, so that people could get some information about the witnesses and about Jehovah. So anybody that did it exactly in that time frame were not arrested. The danger was the ones that may have come before or after. And when the people saw it in the town, they thought that the planes from Britain had come over and dropped all these pamphlets because they had done such an amazing job in a short amount of time distributing them.
Did you have to wear the purple triangle?
Yes, he most definitely did. And one story too, he was taken one time to the headquarters. They put a gun to his head. They said, we want you to Heil Hitler right now, or we will shoot you. And he said, I can't Heil Hitler. Jesus is my savior. That, if I say Heil Hitler, it's saying that he's my savior. And the guy held the gun. He was waiting for the bullet. And finally the guy said, oh, go back to your barracks. You'll never change. And just sent him back. But he came that close to losing his life on the spot. And another time, just for fun, the guards would do things like this in the camp. They shot bullets in the barracks. One went right through his mattress at 4 o'clock in the morning, right underneath him. And he just took it. And it was amazing the stuff they had to take, but they kept each other going.
What was Uncle Billy like?
Oh, he was fun. And we were real close. His daughters, they had 5 girls, and they were like super close cousins. And he tuned pianos, which I think is like a lost art. And we loved piano growing up. My dad played the violin. My brother and I, my mom, who composed her own song, by the way, played piano. And so he was very, very musically talented. Every girl played a different instrument. And I'm still very close to the girls.
Did he talk much about his part?
Oh, yeah. He was really the archivist of the family. And then when he died, my mom took that over. But he was really good about keeping up all that information. He was excellent in doing that. My hope is to carry on the message that my parents left, their legacy, I guess you could say, and the good things they did spiritually, and just let people know that it's still as strong as ever. Nothing's changed. We as a group feel the same way and take the same stand, and that people all over are taking that stand everywhere in various forms, and that has never changed, solid as a rock. That you should be allowed to practice your faith uninhibited. If you're not harming and killing other people, why not get to do your own faith? Get to practice what you believe. And like I said, I feel like her case helped bring freedom for all Americans. And that to me is very critical. Because if it had been the way it was going and stayed that way, who knows where it would have gone. You know, if it would have been continued to be negative, like who else could they have justified being hurtful to?